Thank you again, all veterans who have served. We're so thankful that you have served and given so much of your life to protect our freedoms. Today is the second week of Big Hearts. My name's Derreck. I'm the lead pastor here at Faith Bible Church. And last week, we looked at Operation Christmas Child Shoebox. And I want to just say something real quick. Y'all delivered, by the way. Last week we talked about how everyone should be a part of Operation Christmas Child Shoebox, and now we have no more shoeboxes to give out. So that's an awesome problem to have. I think we have like 6 left, but they're part of the decoration, so I don't know if they're giving them out. But that doesn't mean that we're done. So on November 24th, you need to bring those boxes back, all right? They need to be full. You need to bring them back on November 24th or before that. And if you still want to participate, you can go online on our website, fbcwi.church. There's a link there where you can fill out a box online. I know Pastor Terry and a couple other people do that as well. And also, if you do want to still pack a physical shoebox, you can still do that. Just grab an Amazon box or something else. Just pack up a box full of goodies that's that size, and we'll throw that into the other ones that we have. So last week, we kicked off Operation Christmas Child Shoebox, and we asked this question. Or actually, we asked 3 questions. So when we talk about generosity, we wanted to look at what are my needs, what can I give, and what are the needs of others. Because we said generosity requires one thing. If we want to be generous, it requires that we have faith. And Jesus taught on the Sermon on the Mount. He said, don't worry about everything because I will take care of your needs if you trust me. Trust me because I'll take care of you. And so when we trust in God, it gives us freedom to ask these questions. What are my needs that God says he will provide for me? What can I give? And what are the needs of the people around us? And these 3 questions need to be the base for generosity that we keep coming back to, especially this month as we talk about generosity week by week. We keep coming back to these questions. What are my needs? What can I give? And what are the needs of the people around me? What are the needs of the people around me? And we hope to try to answer that 3rd question week by week as we look at the different needs within our community. And today we're going to look at the end of the service here, we're going to look at a need in RFK, Royal Family Kids, and what that is, and the needs there, and how we can participate. But we kicked off our generosity campaign talking about trusting God. The basis of generosity is a trust in God, that he will continue to provide for us, and we can be generous, and he will continue to give we can never outgive God. The more we give, the more he's going to be generous to us. Trust is the basis of generosity. And we ask the question, is generosity only for people with abundance? Is it only for rich people? And absolutely not. In fact, most of the people in the Bible that we read that are generous or examples of generosity are people who don't have much to begin with, but they still give. So we're going to continue our generosity campaign this week looking at a passage from Matthew chapter 24 and 25. So I'm going to begin with a word of prayer this morning, then we'll dive into this passage. Father, thank you so much for giving us everything that we have. Thank you for giving us this amazing country where we can serve freely. Thank you for giving us this building to meet in. Thank you for giving us the air in our lungs this morning, that we woke up and we're able to see each other. Everything we have is a gift from you. God, I pray that we can give what you've given us and bless other people with it. Teach us how to be generous. Teach us areas of our lives where you want us to be more generous. And pray these things in your name. Amen. So as we look at generosity, I want to look at Matthew chapter 24, and the notes should be on the screen right now. You can scan that QR code, and that'll take you to the Bible app. So in Matthew 24, I want to set the stage here. Jesus is a few days out from being executed, from being murdered. And his disciples are with him. They're in the temple area. And his disciples are kind of looking around. They're amazed at the temple. The temple is this beautiful structure made by King Solomon. And it's amazing. And they're kind of amazed by the temple and all the buildings and telling Jesus about it. Like, Jesus, look at this. Look at this temple. It's incredible. And Jesus has this response. Kind of surprises them a little bit. He looks around at the buildings, and Jesus says, everything you see is going to be destroyed. In fact, he says, there won't be one stone left on top of another. Talking about the temple. So the disciples, rightfully so, are a little confused. Like, okay, I'm assuming he's talking about the end of the world. And so they continue traveling, and they go up to this place called the Mount of Olives, and they rest there for a while. And as they're on the Mount of Olives, the disciples decide now's a good time to kind of get some clarity on what Jesus is talking about. Jesus, you talked about the destruction of the temple. Tell us what it's going to be like. Tell us about the end of the world. What will happen? What will signal your return? What will signal the end of the world? So Jesus starts preaching a sermon, teaching about what the end will look like. And he gives us a little prophecy here on what the end of the world will look like. And he tells them of the suffering that will come. There'll be trials, troubles, tribulations, lots of suffering. He says, feel sorry for the people who are pregnant or nursing their children. It's going to be a hard time. It's going to be difficult. He tells them that there's going to be false prophets, false messiahs, people that come to claim to be the Messiah but aren't. He warns them that they won't know the day or the hour. It'll be a complete surprise when Jesus returns. So he says, so be vigilant and faithful, serving God all the time. And he gives many parables teaching this one point. So he says there's going to be trials and tribulations. It's going to be difficult, and you're not going to know at all when it's going to happen. It's going to be a surprise, just like that. And he talks about this parable of these 10 maids, and they're going to this wedding feast. And so they have their lamps, the 10 of them. There's 10 foolish ones, or 5 foolish ones, and 5 wise maids. The wise ones got a lot of oil for their lamps so that they wouldn't run out. The foolish ones didn't bring extra oil. So the 10 maids go to this bridal party, and they're outside of this bridal party waiting to be let in by the groom. But he's delayed. So they're waiting, and all of a sudden the ones that don't have a whole lot of oil in their lamp are kind of freaking out because they're like, oh, we're going to run out of oil. So they run to the store. I guess they had 24-hour stores back then. It's the middle of the night. They run to the store, and they're grabbing some oil. But while they're gone, the 5 wise maids are let into the party because the groom comes while they were gone to go get oil. They come back, and they're already let in, and they can't go in. And Jesus is saying this story of the 5 unwise maids, that they missed the groom. They missed the moment to enter into the party. He says because the groom's going to come when no one expects it. So be ready. Always. Be prepared. And I think of generosity sometimes when we are hearing messages on generosity or think about being generous, we can always think this, and I tend to do this too. Like, oh yeah, maybe I'll do that when. Or that does sound like a good idea. I want to be a part of that. And then we push it off though. And we push it off. And we'll say, I'm going to be generous when I get that raise. When we finally feel a little bit more comfortable, then we're going to start being generous. But the problem is we don't even know if tomorrow's going to happen. We're never guaranteed tomorrow. And Jesus is teaching this to his disciples. He's saying, live every single day like Jesus is coming back today. And imagine, speaking about generosity specifically, how generous we would be if we lived like that. How generous, not only with our finances, but everything in our life, if we were generous, like today is the last day of our lives. Like Jesus could come back today, and there is no tomorrow to be generous. And that's what Jesus is teaching his disciples. He's over and over emphasizing this fact that Jesus is coming like a thief in the night. Like in the day of Noah, when the floods, they didn't know when the floods were coming, and they were swept up by the floods because they weren't ready. He's saying you don't know when Jesus is coming, so be generous today. Be ready, be vigilant. He could come back at any moment, and you don't want to be caught unprepared. So Jesus continues to paint this picture of the end of the world. There's going to be sorrow, trouble, tribulation. Jesus is going to come back. No one's going to know when he comes back. And then when he does come back, there's going to be a reckoning. He gives two parables talking about when he returns, the accountability he will require of us. That we will one day answer to God for how we lived our lives. We will answer for what we did with what God has given us. The first parable that Jesus gives talking about this is one that we've all probably heard before. There's a master with 3 servants. And this master is going to go on a journey. So he takes his 3 servants, brings them to him, and he says, I'm going to give you guys each a little bit of my money because I'm going to be gone, and I don't want my money just to sit here and waste. I'm going to trust you guys with some of my money. So to one servant, he gives 5 bags of silver. To another servant, he gives 2 bags of silver. And to the third servant, he gives 1 bag of silver. He says, I'm going to be gone. When I come back, I'm going to bring you back, and we're going to see how you did with my money. So he leaves. Doesn't tell when he's going to be back. It's a surprise. The one servant that received 5, he invested his money and received 5 back, doubled it. The one servant who received 2 bags of silver invested his and doubled it as well. The one servant who received 1 bag of silver, he ran and hid it. He was scared. Scared of what might happen if he lost the money. Scared what might happen if he used it. Then one day the master comes back. He brings his servants to him. They have to give accountability for what they did with what he gave them. To the one servant that had 5, he said, I doubled it, and now I have 10. And he says, good job. Way to go. That's awesome. The next servant comes. He has 2 bags of silver. He says, I doubled it, now I have 4. The master says, great job. But then the last servant comes in. He says, I was scared, so I hid it. And here's your 1 bag of silver back. I did nothing with it. And this is the response that the master gives to that one servant. He says this in Matthew 25:26. But the master replied, you wicked and lazy servant. You knew I harvested crops I didn't plant and gathered crops I didn't cultivate. Why didn't you deposit my money in the bank? At least I could have gotten some interest on it. Then he ordered, take the money from this servant and give it to the one with 10 bags of silver. To those who use well what they are given, even more will be given, and they will have an abundance. But from those who will do nothing, even what little they have will be taken away. Now throw this useless servant into outer darkness, where there will be weeping and gnashing of teeth. It's a pretty powerful story. Jesus is reiterating here the point that there is an accountability that we will give to the master. We will be accountable for what God has given to us. Whether it's large or small, it doesn't matter. And we can be tempted to look at the people who have 5 bags of silver and say, well, they have a lot that God has given them, so they have a lot to invest. Maybe I only have 1 bag of silver. It doesn't matter. The master didn't care how much they had. It was what they did with what they had, not how much they had. Luke 12:48 says this, when someone has been given much, much will be required in return. And when someone has entrusted with much, much will be required. This is some of the last teachings of Jesus before his execution. And he's trying to teach the importance of how we live our lives. That the actions in our life are not inconsequential. It's a hard word. They matter. Our lives matter. How we live our life matters. The actions of our life matter. And this passage can kind of be a scary passage. And I don't want to think there's a person alive that wants to stand before God and hear those words that that wicked servant heard. Depart from me, you wicked, lazy servant. Enter into eternal punishment. No one wants to hear that. But the reality is we will all give an account for the way we live our lives. Every single person in this room. We will all stand before God one day and answer for how we lived our lives, for what we did. And I don't want to preach this sermon as a fear tactic, and I don't think that's what Jesus did either. He's not trying to scare his disciples, but he's reminding them that the things that we think are so important on this earth aren't. He's trying to shift their perspective on eternal things rather than temporal things. Because when we change our perspective, we change our generosity. When we change the perspective of our lives, that living life is not just for this moment. It's not just for this world. It's for the next. And Jesus is trying to teach his disciples here, hey, at the end of the world, we'll give an account for what you did in this life. So what did you do in this life? Were the actions that you did, were they eternal? Did they matter? Jesus wants us to stand before God and hear those words, good job. So how? How can we be generous? How can we invest well what God has given us in this life? What does that look like? Jesus ends his Sermon on the Mount of Olives with another parable. And this parable teaches us the greatest, what I believe is the greatest form of generosity. Matthew 25, verse 31. Jesus says this, but when the Son of Man comes in his glory, and all the angels with him, then he will sit upon his glorious throne. All the nations will be gathered in his presence, and he will separate the people as a shepherd separates the sheep from the goats. He will place the sheep on his right hand, the goats on his left. Then the king will say to those on his right, come who are blessed by my Father, inherit the kingdom prepared for you from the creation of the world. For I was hungry, and you fed me. I was thirsty, and you gave me drink. I was a stranger, and you invited me into your home. I was naked, and you gave me clothing. I was sick, and you cared for me. I was in prison, and you visited me. Then these righteous ones will reply, Lord, when did we ever see you hungry and feed you, or thirsty and give you something to drink, or a stranger and show you hospitality, or naked and give you clothing? When did we ever see you sick and in prison and visit you? And the king will say, I tell you the truth. When you did it to one of the least of these, my brothers and sisters, you were doing it to me. Then the king will turn to those on the left. He will say, away with you, you cursed ones, into the eternal fire prepared for the devil and his demons. For I was hungry, and you didn't feed me. I was thirsty, and you didn't give me drink. I was a stranger, and you didn't invite me into your home. I was naked, and you didn't give me clothing. I was sick and in prison, and you didn't visit me. Then they will reply, Lord, when did we ever see you hungry or thirsty or a stranger or naked or sick or in prison and not help you? And he will answer, I tell you, when you refuse to help the least of these, my brothers and sisters, you were refusing to help me. And they will go away into eternal punishment, but the righteous will go into eternal life. And with that passage, let's have a word of prayer, and we'll be dismissed. I'm just kidding. That is a crazy passage. Some of you were like, yes, all right. Early. Jesus teaches us a lot in this passage concerning generosity. I believe it's what he teaches is the purest form of generosity. Being generous to the least of these. Generous to the least of these. Today I want to look at how we can have this type of generosity. How can we be generous to the least of these? The first thing that we can see, if we want to be generous to the least of these, it is a generosity that requires genuineness, authenticity. It's a generosity that is genuine. And authenticity requires action. See, true generosity is an overflow of love. Jesus shows that feeding the hungry, welcoming strangers, caring for the sick, they're not just actions, they're embodiments of love. That we are the hands and feet of Jesus. We use that expression, but that is literally the hands and feet of Jesus. Loving those people who no one else will love. It's genuine. 1 John 3:18 says this, let us not love with words or speech, but with actions and in truth. Genuine generosity and love go hand in hand. Generosity has always gone hand in hand with love. For God so loved the world that he gave. Love is always spelled G-I-V-E. I think I did that a couple sermons ago and I forgot the E, but I got it this time. G-I-V-E. Give. Generosity requires love. Genuine generosity is an outpour of love. It's authentic. It's giving without expectation of return. It's a pure, motivated giving. I'm not giving because this person can help me in return. They can give me something. It's not, I'll scratch your back if you scratch mine. Genuine generosity, giving to the least of these, is without expectation of return. See, our acts of generosity should be for the sake of one another, not for any reward. Matthew 6:3, Jesus teaches us that when we give, we should give in secret, not even knowing what the left hand knows what the right hand's doing. Give in secret. Because that is a pure motive. Maybe this looks like an anonymous act of kindness, or looks like giving without expectation of acknowledgement. I don't know what it is. But give genuinely. See, generosity that is genuine mirrors Christ's love. And not just in material ways. It mirrors Christ in his kindness. It means generous with our time, generosity with our compassion. See, Jesus' words remind us that when we serve others genuinely, we are a mirror of his character. That's why we call it the fruit of the Spirit. This genuine generosity, this outpour of love, of kindness, of gentleness, of patience. And we can ask ourselves, are we genuine with the fruit of the Spirit? Is our generosity authentic? Are we a reflection of Christ in our daily lives? And if we want to be generous to the least of these, it requires a genuine generosity, an authentic heart. It's not something that's manipulated. It's something that starts from a relationship with Christ and outflows from there. It's a genuine generosity. If we want to be genuine or generous to the least of these, a generosity that is also inconvenient, oftentimes inconvenient. See, this kind of generosity means that we embrace interruptions in life. And Jesus' example shows us that true service often comes when we least expect it. It's when we least feel prepared even. Look at Jesus' ministry. His whole ministry could almost be summed up by interruptions. Him healing or teaching or caring. He always had time for people that needed him. So how do we respond to the interruptions in our own lives? When we're interrupted by something, does that equal frustration? Do we get upset? My life is interrupted. This thing that I wasn't expecting happened. Or do we look at them as opportunities? So if we follow the life of Jesus, every single interruption was an opportunity to serve. It was an opportunity to be generous. Generosity is inconvenient. Generosity requires us to be flexible. It means to let go of your schedule. That we're not supposed to be servants to our schedules. Let go of those. Be flexible. Embrace the interruptions. Proverbs 3:27 says, "Do not withhold good from those to whom it is due when it is in your power to act. That means if you have the ability to help somebody, do it. Don't let your schedule tell you no. Do it. Embrace those interruptions as opportunities to be generous. Generosity is inconvenient. It means that we prioritize other people over our own comfort. Philippians 2:3 says, do nothing out of selfish ambition or vain conceit. Rather, in humility, value others above yourself. It's inconvenient. It prioritizes the needs of others over my schedule, over what I want to get done today. It means self-denial, intentionally choosing the needs of others over my own convenience. If we want generosity to the least of these, it has to be genuine, an outpour of the love of Christ in our lives. It's going to require inconvenience. And lastly, that kind of generosity is sacrificial. It's giving even when it costs us. Mark 12:41, Jesus tells the story of the woman and her 2 pennies that she gives. And Jesus says she gave the most of everyone because she gave everything she had. She sacrificed everything. See, this shifts our perspective. Every act of generosity is an act of worship and reverence towards Christ. Every sacrifice, every inconvenience. Jesus is saying, when you do these things, you're doing them unto me. Every time that you serve the least of these, we're serving Jesus. There are opportunities to serve the one who created all of us. See, in being generous to the least of these is not a one-time thing. It's not making a shoebox and bring it back on November every year and you did your deed of generosity. It's a lifestyle. Being generous to the least of these is a lifestyle. James 1:27 says, a pure religion in the sight of God and the Father means caring for the orphans and widows in their distress and refusing to let the world corrupt you. The greatest form of generosity doesn't look to our own benefit, but the benefit of others. It reflects Jesus. It reflects his love. It reflects his sacrifice. So how are you engaging in genuine, inconvenient, sacrificial acts of generosity? If God, at the end of all things, is separating us between the sheep and the goats, are we genuine? Or are we a goat trying to pretend to be a sheep? Are we genuinely a sheep, reflecting the heart of Christ to the world around us, being generous? You want to know who are usually the least of these in our society today? Children. They often can't give us anything in return. They require sacrifice and a generous amount of patience most times. That's why if you look at the common thread of all these organizations that we're partnering with this month, it revolves around serving children. Operation Christmas Child. Today's Royal Family Kids. In a few weeks, we're going to look at CareNet. See, children can often be overlooked, and not just because they're so small. In fact, the sad thing is that many people in our culture would say that some children aren't even human with human rights. There's a reason we serve children. It's serving the least of these. And maybe you're looking at your life and you're thinking, well, there's not a whole lot of generosity to the least of these in my life. It's not too late to start today. It's not too late to start. And a great way to start being generous to the least of these is serving children. Whether it's Sunday morning over in the Faith Kids area, or maybe it's here on a Wednesday night serving at Awana, or Thursday night serving in youth group. Maybe it's doing Operation Christmas Child. Maybe it's serving at Royal Family Kids that we're going to hear about in a little bit. When we are generous to the least of these, we are serving children. So don't leave today as we leave this room and go home and eat lunch and all that stuff and watch games, ignoring the least of these. Don't leave today ignoring the least of these. Jesus says this is important. This is how the end of the world, we're going to give accountability for what he's given us. So be generous to the least of these. In a moment, we're going to watch a video talking about Royal Family Kids and how it ministers to foster children in our area. And then I've asked Jared Castillo, a member here at Faith Bible Church who serves at Royal Family Kids, to come up and give his testimony. So let's watch that video together.
I grew up in a Christian home, and I love God. My perceived impact that I could have on the kingdom was the money I could give. I never thought that beyond giving money to the church, I could really have any impact. And that was okay with me. I was satisfied with it. I'm an accountant, and because I'm an accountant, numbers talk to me. Melissa, my wife, and I have both really had a heart for foster care for a long time. Pastor Rick mentioned on a Sunday morning about the statistics and understanding that these kids have this horrible reality in front of them. And my thought was, I want to get involved. But, I have a young child, I can't be a foster parent right now. But I finally got tired of making excuses, and so I said, okay, Royal Family Kids is something I can commit to, and so I went for it. All the counselors go up the day before camp and kind of get things ready for the campers when they show up the next day. They walk you through the final trainings, and you start to kind of have a panic attack, and I was freaked out. I honestly was the place where if they would have said, you know what, we're having some campers cancel at the last minute, we don't need all the counselors, I would have left. I would have been like, all right, that means that I don't have to do this. These kids have been through so much, and what qualifies me to help them? And although I knew God had placed me there for a reason, it wasn't clear at that moment. And so I was just freaked out. I didn't sleep well at all. And then when the buses were driving in, I was physically shaking, trying to be enthusiastic, but I just didn't know what was gonna walk off the bus and meet me. And you'd heard the stories about kids that were difficult at camp, and you had heard all the stories about their background. For so many of these kids, they've lost everything. If I listed the top 5 most important things and had all of them ripped away from me, what would that do to me? And that's what happens to these kids. If they're lucky, they have God to hold on to. Most of them don't. They've never been to church. They have nothing. And they get yanked out of their home. And for some of them, it happens at school. They don't even get a home to pack. They don't take their favorite toy with them. They got what they have on their back. And for me, I can't imagine that happening. That's the reality for these kids. We wonder why they have issues. For us, being able to give God to these kids is the greatest gift we can give them. I loved the experience of camp by the end of it. I was terrified at the beginning, and by the end, I would never trade it. I'll go back every year. Camp is this really unique opportunity to take these kids who have been through all this stuff and give them an environment in which they're safe, they're loved, there's attention poured upon them, and it's super exciting to see what happens in such a short period of time. It also showed me, though, if this was their reality at home, that would change their life. One of the great things that Royal Family Kids did over the past number of years is develop the club program, which is the mentoring program that runs year-round. They ask us to spend 4 hours a month with the kids, which is easy for those of us that have served, because we want to give as much to these kids as we have. It's so fun to see the change, the trust be built up with somebody that's consistently there for them, that loves them, that encourages them in what they're doing. It's amazing the bond we have now. And most of the time we play basketball, because that's what he wants to do. But that's okay, because we talk and we get the time together. When I told the first young man that I was mentoring, I love you, I'm proud of you, I think you have great things for your life. And to see his reaction to that, he lit up. It was like he had heard it for the first time and he believed it. And so being able to give that to somebody, that's truly what most of us want to hear, is that we're loved and somebody's proud of us. And to be able to give that to a kid is one of the most phenomenal experiences I've ever experienced. God has really gotten a hold of my heart. And he has shown me it's not about your paycheck. That's not all I have for you. I have greater things for you. I think I found my thing with helping the foster care community. It may not stop at Royal Family Kids. I have some really big dreams I feel like God has given me. And it's really amazing to feel like I'm walking straight in the middle of his will for my life. And the way he's gripped me and changed the way I look at the world through these foster kids, that's changed me more than I could ever change them. And it's really exciting. I feel like a whole new purpose for my life. I feel like I truly know what I'm supposed to do, and it's so much joy to walk in that.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Jared Castillo. Some of you might recognize me. My wife, Michelle, and I have been attending Faith Bible now for about 7 years, and this was actually also my childhood church. But I'm here this morning to speak about my experience with Royal Family Kids, which, if it rings a bell with some of you, or maybe you've even served there before, they've been in here before, so trying to get reconnected. And I started in getting involved with RFK almost 10 years ago now as a camp counselor. And fun side note, I had the realization recently my first two campers were 11 years old. I was 21 at the time. So this next year, they'll be the same age that I was when I started as a counselor. So fun reminder that I'm getting a bit older. But and this upcoming camp will actually be the first time that I'm joining Camp Not as a counselor, because I've actually been asked by leadership to join as an assistant dean of men, which for those of you who know me, if you maybe now have some concerns for the leadership, don't worry, I understand. I already lodged my concerns the first meeting. So the dean of men, Jeff, says he'll take responsibility for me, so good luck to him. But looking at some of those statistics that we saw in those videos, it's really heartbreaking. And I know the first question for some might be, what can we do in 5 days? You know, just you heard his testimony, or a few hours at camp is in the face of that. And I like to think of the example that Jesus gave us in the 2 times that he fed thousands of people with a few loaves of bread and small fish. And our God can do so much with so little. And I can tell you, when I was on your side, listening to a girl give her testimony, how she was 18 years old at the time, a former camper coming back as a counselor. And one of the things she said that struck my heart was that the 25 days she had at camp, because camp is for ages 7 to 11, it's 5 years, 5 days a year. Get a little math to keep everyone awake here this morning. But those were the only good memories she had of her entire childhood. Not the best, not some, the only. That's the kind of privilege and opportunity in that time that we're talking about. And I can tell you, I've seen some amazing things in those 5 days. One year, I got to lead several young boys in a prayer of salvation, giving their lives to Christ. And last year, I got to see one of those very boys come back to camp, 18 years old, as a buddy counselor, just like that girl who touched my heart all those years ago. And I've gotten to see a camper come off the bus, angry, frowning, not wanting his picture taken, anything to do with camp. And on the last day of camp, there were more pictures of him in the camp slideshow than anyone else, smiling ear to ear in every single one, having done every activity that camp had to offer. And I got to ride with him on the bus ride home, and as he was crying, telling me he had lost everything, and he was just clutching onto all the things he'd gotten from camp, telling me how he's going to treasure every single one, even his name tag. Our Dean of Men, Jeff, likes to say that we're trajectory changers. We're not trying to fix or heal anyone's trauma in a few days, but we're given these opportunities, these moments, to show them the love of God, to give them some of those fun memories of just being kids, to show them compassion and kindness and patience that maybe they haven't really experienced from adults before. And So I'd like to just close out with a couple last thoughts here, because I know maybe some of you are like I was when I was on your side. And I remember hearing her story, being almost in tears and praying, Lord, this is so important. Some of these people in this room really got to step up and help you out here, Lord. Maybe that guy over there, you got to understand, I did not like kids at the time. I didn't want kids. I didn't want anything to do with them. That was not in my comfort zone, right? And I think that might be the only time in my life, though, that I ever audibly heard the Lord speak to me, because I heard, no, I want you to go. And when I finally came to grips with that, I went full Moses on him, right? I'm like, Lord, you know I don't like kids. There's got to be people in here who are like teachers, work with kids, who are like, they're qualified. You got to send them, Lord. And he didn't argue with me, but he left me with 3 last words: obey or don't. And I'm sure, as you can gather, I did decide to obey, and now 10 years later, here I am still with RFK. I have 4 kids of my own. I am involved in children and youth ministry, and apparently joining on the leadership when I was so hesitant to get involved, right? And so both in the children that I've seen and with my own life as an example, I can tell you firsthand how this camp and club can change the trajectory, truly, of a person's life. And so I'd like to close out with just a little bit of a challenge to everyone, that maybe if you were like me, and if the Lord's been calling your heart, speaking to you to, whether that be for RFK or another organization or here at church, wherever that might be, would you be willing to consider obeying and giving whatever time or energy you have available to do it, and stepping out of your comfort zone, maybe out of your wheelhouse, and seeing how when you do, that glorifies God all the more, and how he's able to take whatever you're able to give and prosper and multiply that for his kingdom, both in the world and in your own life, in a way that you never thought possible when you just say yes. And so if for you that might look like RFK, I just encourage you to stop out. We have a table set up out the doors here that you can learn more about how you can get involved, whether that be as a mentor that would require a 6-hour training, or as a camp counselor, or continuing, we have a partner organization, MTRAC. If you maybe feel more comfortable with older kids, it takes them through 12 to 18 to young adulthood. We have, we call them action teams that meet once a month for things like club and camp planning, church outreach like we're doing, fundraising, things like that, or even just seeing where you can get plugged in, connected for individual tasks. The past couple years, we've had people come and offer to help unpack our U-Haul that we take to camp and back, so that the counselors and the staff, after spending their 5 days at camp, don't have to come back and do that. I can't tell you what a blessing things like that are. So if it's on your heart, step out there and check it out. Feel free to come up to me if you want more stories or information. I have plenty of stories. I love you all. Thank you so much for your time and attention today, and have a great rest of your Sunday.